I'm super excited to be here today, and thanks for joining this session. What we want to talk about today is what do you mean by API taxonomy? We start there, and part of that would be how to explain when some companies succeed in being digital savvy company, succeed in their digital transformation journey, while others are struggling to show some kind of progress in that digital transformation journey. We'll talk about key observations from the past, and you'll walk away with some very important practical examples of what sophisticated API taxonomy would do to your API program. A quick introduction about myself. I've been in the industry for 20 plus years. As a developer, started as a developer, architect, infrastructure engineer, and then in the past 5 to 6 years, I've been focusing on the API space with a lot of passion about API governance. I co-founded the API program in Discover. When we were talking about this talk with Maddie and Baptist, we were talking about how within our API program in Discover, we have the security aspect, we have internal API, we have external APIs. And I think Maddie was talking about a Confucius quote when he was saying, when I was young and smart, I thought I want to change the world. And when I became wiser, I wanted to change myself. Right? So that's kind of, the internal API focus and the external APIs focus. External API is changing the world. Internal API is changing our own, the wisdom to change our own APIs internally used. So our talk today will be mostly around the internal wisdom of API and that taxonomy that got us organized within our house. So this is my LinkedIn and my email. If you'd like to connect, I would love to continue the conversation there. So how to explain when companies are succeeding, companies like Uber, Stripe, Spotify, all those digitally savvy companies that are succeeding in digital transformation versus the other companies that are still struggling, or many of the companies that are slow in showing that progress of becoming digital savvy company. Like everyone else, everyone has access to API gateways, API portals, same technology, same consultant, API vendors. Everyone have the same access to those resources, right? But not everyone has the same transformation, digital transformation success like Stripe or Amazon or the likes of digital savvy companies. So what is it that they do differently, and what is it that it has to be a common pattern? It turns out that there is a pattern out there where you would see, and I would like to share some of those. There's a discovery that I have made over the years, a few discoveries, that this is one of the discoveries I want to share with you today on how those patterns come about to enable this API first or this success in the digital transformation journey. When we're talking about scaling a company starts as a startup and we scale that company, usually it tends to slow down. It tends to be less efficient. It takes more people, more money, more time to get anything done, right? The teams will start to focus inwardly on their own team, their own department, and they forget about the focus on their customer. Now, at scale, the interaction model between teams start to be a challenge. It's a lot of choke points, lots of meetings, and we have heard the talk about APIs instead of meetings, right? Like you don't have to call for a meeting, you can just use my API, right? So that's kind of the model. And companies continue to challenge the status quo of how teams interact with each other, how teams would interact with each other, and how to grow at scale. And when we create API, everybody adds API. Everybody has the APIs, thousands maybe of APIs. But adding APIs could be adding to the chaos. Adding, it exacerbates the problem, does not solve the problem if you're not doing it right? So leaders start to look at API management, API governance to tackle that problem, and they will look at API management as a practice to be able to build and scale digital companies. But where to start? Back to Confucius, another quote from Confucius. Confucius says, if names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. And if language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. So what he's saying is that if names be not correct, matters and affairs cannot be carried on to success, right? So the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. The beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. If you're familiar with the Judeo-Christian tradition, the first task God gave to humans is to name the animals, right? So that was kind of another emphasis on taxonomy. So what is taxonomy? From the dictionary, taxonomy is the science or the law, or the principle of classification, right? It's an ordered system. You start to bring order to a chaotic system by classifying, by having that taxonomy, bringing order to a chaos. And in the API, what's an API taxonomy? That's the beginning of wisdom in API management. The beginning of wisdom in API management is to be able to have those metadata and all the different categories and buckets where you could organize your APIs. You gotta be able to say, here's my intended usage of that API. Or maybe this is, and we're gonna talk more about that, how to be sophisticated about that, and how that can drive successful business transformation. I live in Chicago. Taxonomy in the garden is very important. I love hibiscus trees. And one time I went and bought a hibiscus tree, my wife and I, and we got it, and it turns out to be an exotic tree. It cannot work in Chicago, right? So it is important to understand, oh, this is a shade tree, this is evergreen tree, this is something that you could plant in Chicago, something, you know. So this was very important when you are not familiar with that domain. Taxonomy will get you up to speed very quickly. I'm not a gardener, I'm not an expert, but a taxonomy would help me tremendously in that regard. So let's have some key observations, some learned lesson I want to share. Looking at an API catalog, how do you look at names, just the names of those APIs? Does your API catalog reflect good, meaningful API names? Right? I can't count how many times I'm looking at the catalog and I see the ABC, right? Like ABC or FCFG API, right? Can you relate to this, right? Yeah, it's very, very common. The developers pick the darnest names, right? Like who can name an API that's intended for use? An ABC, was very intentionally, like it's made a lot of sense for them, for their team, but when it goes outside their team, make no sense. Another one was the transaction API. What's a transaction API, right? When we delve a little bit deeper into that, it was a person-to-person payment API, right? That makes a whole lot of difference when it has the P2P payment API. Transactions too generic. Or the request form API. What request? What form? Right? And we used to, as a committee, get experts, best brain together, and we spent a lot of time trying to pick the right name for the API, and we still struggled. right? Bad names are confusing, and it's very hard to scale that process if with the amount and the explosion of the number of APIs, how you start scale that process of picking and handpicking every API and try to give it the right name. There gotta be a better way to do that and to be able to scale that. Another key observation, hopefully you can relate to this too, is that looking at two APIs, sometimes they share very close to each other, but can you tell the difference? Is it a duplicate API? How can you tell the difference? Is it a duplicate or not? How you can tell? Is it by extracting the information? Most likely it will be extracting information from the domain expert. Try to call someone, find somebody who was there during that time when those API were put together, and you try to extract that information out of their heads. Or maybe reading the code, or maybe some documentation, extra documentation if it's there. So even if the API is there and has relatively or perfect name, it's very hard to tell whether it's a duplicate or not. Maybe it's okay to have those two APIs, but one is more about it's for this region as opposed to that region. One, maybe it's less cost. I would use it more for that kind of use case, but the other one is more for the Cadillac one that cost us more, so we want to limit a little bit of the use on that API. It could be many different reasons why I would need two APIs, but the name is not going to tell me. So I would need more metadata and more self-explanatory information to be able to tell if I need to develop a new API, or I already have it, or I need to enhance an existing one. One last observation here is how developers tend to learn. Developers will learn, any new developers, they tend to say, where's your API? Show me your API. And I can tell, I can learn a great deal of certain domains, certain capabilities by just looking at a sequence or a collection of APIs. APIs are all about advertising and communicating a business capability or a technical capability, right? So putting those APIs together to advertise a certain capability and to be able to communicate that contract about that capability and the interaction model with that business or technical capability makes a lot of sense to many of the developers. If someone is new to your company, new to your team, they would rather have them, send them a Postman collection or some kind of here's our API, here's our capability. They learn a great deal about the domain by just going through that collection of APIs. Now, the summary is teams struggle to pick a meaningful name, and even if they have the perfect name, is not sufficient. Bad names are confusing, and lack of a meaningful taxonomy are leading to API that are hard to find, painful to understand, easy to duplicate, and that leads to a lot of chaos. It's a very chaotic catalog or a very chaotic state of being as a digital company with those thousands of API that makes no sense, or at least to the organization, to a newer one that coming to the organization, it starts to make no sense. Taxonomy of APIs will bring order to that chaos. Taxonomy as a standardization tool, very powerful standardization tool, and we're going to see some examples of that. A taxonomy as a rationalization tool and as a teaching tool. When you want to change some behaviors, some standardization to a whole company at scale, doing it for one team or two teams, or maybe you could do that in an easier, relatively easier way. But doing it at scale as the company is growing, you need that kind of a powerful tool to be able to systemically influence and being able to standardize your API lifecycle. But we need to be sophisticated about it. I need to really go beyond the basic taxonomy of internal versus external, or this API is for this line of business or that line of business, or that's basic taxonomy. It's helpful to some degree, but we really need to take it to the next level beyond that basic taxonomy to really being sophisticated about it. If we use it as a tool, changing behaviors is the hardest part. What I mean by changing behavior is, let's say many of the departments, many of the teams, they have their own standards, they have their own tools, they have their own, how to change that kind of behavior, right? First, one of the patterns is to bubble it up, the area of concern, whatever the area of concern is, you bubble it up in the taxonomy. That's being sophisticated about it, right? You bubble it up in the taxonomy, you start to teach it, and then you start measuring the change of behavior of how people are using it. Being part of the taxonomy will drive the right questions. And maybe you can adjust from there. Will drive the right change of behavior, and it will drive commitment. And this is the key, drive commitment enterprise-wide to be able to commit to that standard, right? So the purpose-driven taxonomy, or having the sophisticated taxonomy, solid taxonomy, whatever we want to call it, is to be able to design the taxonomy in a way that we identify the area of focus, the area of struggle, you put it into the taxonomy, and you start seeing the change of behavior. And areas, very common areas of struggle, sample outcomes of that sophisticated, if we all on our own start to identify those areas, I bet you we're gonna come back and share our list, and we'll have a very common list, right? Business alignments, right? How to have a better business alignment. Can the taxonomy help with that? How to have built-in security, how to apply the right level of governance to the right level of APIs, right? All that struggle, if we can tackle it in a way that's more systemic and more sophisticated, we should be able to get to that level of maturity. First example, driving better business alignment. So this bucket of the taxonomy, you'll see that there's a business capability that's well-defined, or a competency. I think in the keynotes this morning, I was talking about competencies. What is the competency? What is the business capability? What is the system domain, right? And every API must belong to that business domain or that competency. I'm supporting that competency and part of that. So it's like trying to make sense out of the API. And that's shift left as possible. This is during design phase because this is part of the taxonomy, right? As early as possible. Now, as a provider, I can tell, do I need that API? It already exists, right? Maybe that's a rationalization tool. Or maybe it exists but does not do this. So do I need another one, or I need to enhance this one? It drives the right conversation. It drives the right change of behavior because it's in the taxonomy and we have been sophisticated about it, and now we intentionally putting it up there. If you can classify it, now you can find it and you can discuss it, right? And from a consumer perspective, you also, you always start with the competency. I'm not gonna be searching about the ABC API, right? I search about a credit check API, that's right? Or what's that business or technical capability that I will be searching for? Another bucket in the sophisticated taxonomy would be driving agility or driving the right level of governance. In my experience, I've seen many of the APIs, we used to treat all APIs the same. But having this one taxonomy could potentially eliminate maybe 80%, 90% of the noise. So that reusable versus private or inner API, right? And apply the right governance model to each one of those intentional of the reuse of the interface. There's maybe 80, 90% of your API, they go to the fast track. I'm developing this only for my own. Maybe my own value stream architect will need to approve it. I don't need to go beyond that and have the whole enterprise looking at my API. It's just for my own domain, right? Or if this is becoming, if intentional to be for the whole reuse, now we invest in it. Now maybe those 10% or 20% of the APIs need those type of investments and scrutiny to look at them more carefully, right? So that's one bucket in the taxonomy, can drive a lot of good focused discussion on which API is which before we even start talking about it. And route, if you can classify it that way, you can automate that workflow. Operation maturity is usually an afterthought. So that's where you've got the 5.9 API versus the 3.9 or best effort API. So try to shift left that discussion, operational maturity early on. So I would know if I am developing this API really for as a 5.9 prime time, or maybe I'm just playing with it, setting the expectation with that metadata about the API. There's a lot more secure data classification. Now with the regulatory, if you are in that interface, you have restricted data, private data, confidential data. Auditors would love to say, if you can classify this, now you can protect it, right? You can apply the right scrutiny to it. The built-in security, right? If you want to enforce built-in securities, the taxonomy should have those patterns identified, very well defined, and you pick from the card, right? Is it OAuth? Is it GWT? Is it, you know, and now it's outside the hands of the developers. Developer will focus on their business logic, and now they understand there are some templates that you should be using, and the security experts are the one defining those patterns and publishing it into the taxonomy. The clean design. And so when you put it all together, that's a simple taxonomy that's sophisticated enough to be able to drive values and drive the right conversation and drive the right discussions of the digital transformation that the company will need to accomplish. So as a summary, those are the areas of common struggles where the taxonomy, where you pick that struggle area, bubble it in taxonomy, and then start measuring the change of behavior. What great about taxonomy is that it secures the commitment, and it secures when we develop the taxonomy, we usually talk to a lot of different stakeholders to be able to have that enablement on the organization. And there's great areas of success in every pocket. We bring that into the taxonomy and we try to standardize it across the board. But defining the proper taxonomy is just the start, the beginning of wisdom. And once we start the beginning of wisdom with that taxonomy, there's a lot you could do when you take it to the next level, when you start driving value out of that taxonomy. That's all I have for today. And feel free, please, to hit me up on LinkedIn. I do have an article just published yesterday going a little bit deeper on some of those, one of the taxonomy on microservice versus API, if you'd like to check that out, and we can have a conversation there. Right, thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, while we're transitioning to the next speaker, I mean, this is a great topic and one that we can go on probably for the whole day talking about it. Just maybe more of a comment than a question. I mean, the idea of naming and which you drilled in on is just a step, as you were saying, toward the consumption of the API. Right? And there's so much more that needs to be done beyond just naming to drive the change in behavior on the part of the developer, right? So one of the things I always liked a cartoon that I used to see with this guy who medieval battle with the swords and that kind of thing, and somebody shows up with a machine gun and says, I have a solution to your problem here, and the guy says, I'm too busy fighting the battle to deal with it, right? So, you know, the developers already have tools that they're using, and they just go back to what worked for them before instead of this. So naming becomes a way of exposing it, but we still have to help change their behavior, right? So steps beyond just naming. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's move our next
Thank you.
to our next speaker here.